tonight, for our apostrophe meetup, we planned it around a project that we've had going for a little while called apostrophe-samples. And this is one of those nerdy websites that was designed by the developer. As you can see from this lovely page here. Not the most beautiful design in the world, but my goal with this site, our goal with the site, hasn't been to show off design shops. It's been to have a place for the developers who are always asking us about apostrophe. This sounds great. I think I understand what you're telling me to do with the code. Where do I put the code? We've had a big issue with context, understanding where things go. Now, I think I was overhearing, but I wanted to get like a quick show of hands from the new faces in the room. Have you worked with apostrophe before? Okay, so I'll bear that in mind, that a little overview of apostrophe would be helpful here too. So I'll take this project from the top, but I'm also going to address some things, both for this group and for our streaming audience, that go into like slightly more advanced stuff about where you can put your JavaScript in the context of an apostrophe site. So apostrophe, of course, is a CMS. It's an in-context CMS, meaning that I can edit things right on the page. I don't have to wait for I don't have to wait for hitting a save button. Even things can go immediately live. We have ways of not doing that. We have a workflow system and so on for shops and projects that need that kind of functionality. But it's a very dynamic, very Squarespace-like experience in that you can really just dive in there and start adding content to your site. So this is the kind of functionality that we're delivering in an open source product. So it's in many ways, it's like having the open sourceness of WordPress and the user friendliness of something more like Weebly or Squarespace. And there's not much of a downside to that. I can't think of one. So naturally, we're seeing a lot more excitement about it lately. And it's not that hard to get started with a project. We've talked before about the apostrophe CLI module. Let me just pop that on the screen for a moment. This is a good starting point for actually creating a site. All you have to do is install our CLI tool, and then you can use it to create a project, and right away you have a website. And you can begin doing things like adding page templates and so on. For documentation on general apostrophe topics, we have our lovely documentation site. We have tutorials at every level, starting from the getting started level of things. And we think, from what we're hearing, we've done a solid job explaining how to install the requirements on your computer, which isn't too tough to do. We've done a pretty good job covering how you would create your first project, and covering things like editing page templates. So saying, okay, all right, I want to have a different template, I want to have different markup for the home page. Even I understand that users can edit content, but I want to put my structure around that for the homepage. I want to put constraints of what they can do on a homepage, constraints of what they can do on what you might call a default page or an interior page, constraints on things like a landing page. We have pretty good documentation for that as well. We also cover how you can add all sorts of different widgets to the page. And we even cover how to create custom widgets and so forth. But where it gets a little complex for people is where we start talking about really throwing some JavaScript code into apostrophe, because up until a fairly advanced level, you really haven't had to write any. So it's understandable that there's a little bit of a jump at that moment where, okay, you're not just taking advantage of things that are baked into apostrophe, but you really need some help from us in understanding where to put live JavaScript code and integrate it in the project. So the samples project is our effort at showing how that sort of thing can be done. So let me pull out our little list of techniques that are demonstrated in here. One of the first ones I think that I would want to look at is the ability to have nested layouts. And when I talk about nested layouts, I mean things like this. This is a column over here, which I'm creating some content widgets, like a text widget or an images widget or what have you. This is another one over here where I might put some other text, keep on adding content from there. But I also have like a higher level of structure where I can add additional layout to the page. So even though this is a single page template, I can mix and match one column experiences, two column, three column, which really gives your end user a feeling that they control the design of the site without the downsides of them completely being able to, insert CSS, break your responsive design work that you've done for them, trying to make it good on mobile devices, and so on. It's a controlled environment, but it's a flexible one that makes people feel good about the capabilities that you're giving them. So one column, two column, I could even go three column down below that, and so on. So how do we achieve that kind of effect? So let's take a little look at how that's set up in the code. I'm going to look for starters at app.js. Every apostrophe project begins life here. This is like the starting point of your code. The first thing you do is require the apostrophe module and give your site a short name. This is your universal name for your project. It should be, I would say, the same as your Git repo, the same everywhere, the same for your database. Never make your life hard. Never choose to give these things three different names. And now we're going to configure all the apostrophe modules that we're using. As a convenience, I'm going to say, hey, I'd like a fallback views folder. What that does is that lets us put some templates right in this views subdirectory. Then I'm going to start setting up some widgets, 1, 2, and 3 column widgets. And so let's look at how those work. In Apostrophe, I could put the code to drive these widgets right in app.js. We don't generally do that very much, and the reason is that it makes for a cluttered file. It makes it harder to see everything that's going on. I did do it here with apostrophe global, so that's a good example, and it's also a good example of why not, because this is drawing your eye. You're seeing this, and what you should be seeing is just a nice overview of what all the modules are. So let's look in lib modules, apostrophe, or lib modules, one column widgets. Apostrophe will look for an index.js file in lib modules, whatever your module is called. So yes, is that a little bit magical that you don't have to write a require call and so on? It absolutely is magical. Do you get used to it really fast and appreciate not having to write that code? Definitely. So let's have a look at that index.js file. And here we're using Apostrophe's object-oriented pattern. We are extending another module. This is a module that comes for free with Apostrophe called Apostrophe Widgets. And a widget, as you saw when I was editing, is just one unit of editable content. So I'm going to give those widgets a label. When I say contextual only, what I mean there is that let's say if I add an images widget, I'm going to get this modal dialog box asking you for some information. But if I add a widget that is contextual only, like 3 column, I get to skip that part of the process, and I just jump in and start adding things to the actual columns. So let's look at how that code works. I am going to add some fields to the widget. Apostrophe has baked into it this idea of schemas. You've probably all seen schemas in databases of different kinds, SQL schemas, or even Mongo now has schemas. It didn't when we started, but they've introduced the idea. This is where you're saying, okay, here's what all the fields in my database are called. This is how I'm structuring my data. We have something similar for widgets as we do for whole entire documents in Apostrophe as well. So I'm going to add a field with the type area. So what is an area? An area is one of these columns that we're interacting with. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, for the 1 column widget, I'm going to have, this is a 1 column widget here, I'm going to have a single area as one of its fields. So now it knows to store that information with the widget. So what do we do with that to finish the job? Well, we need a template, a markup template to actually render that widget. And in this case, I've written a little nunjux macro. Apostrophe uses nunjux, which is probably the nicest templating language for Node. It is very similar to Jinja, which is very similar to Twig. There's a whole family tree of these. And if you've ever templated a Shopify site, you've seen this syntax. So I'm going to go look at that utils macro for this whole 1 column business. I'm going to call utils.column data widget 1 full. So how does that work? That's going to emerge using my widget as the outer widget, the 1 column widget, as the parent of the area. It's going to give it that name 1, and then it's going to give it some widget definitions. So I'm saying that this widget allows rich text widgets, it allows images widgets, and it allows video widgets, and also a test widget that I was just playing with the other day. So that's why when I get in here, I can hit this plus sign and I can add things of any of these types. And so where this gets really cool is where we go to a 2-column widget, let's say. In the 2-column widget, here it is, we have 2 fields this time, 2 areas, 2 named areas that are nested inside the widget. And the views for that is similar. I'm just going to call the macro twice, output those 2 different areas. So with that and a little bit of CSS, I get this 1-column, 2-column, 3-column effect, and people can really nest layouts and go a little bit crazy making their site. But not too crazy. You can't nest another 3-column inside a 3-column. We didn't set it up that way because we know it would look dumb. We're helping protect folks from decisions that wouldn't work out so hot, or certainly wouldn't work well on mobile. If you wanted to, in responsive CSS, you could just change these columns so they're not floating anymore, and suddenly you would just have 1 column, or take similar approaches to that to achieve responsiveness. So that all works out really well with a minimum of effort. Any questions about this feature before I go on and look at other things? I thought it was a good place to start because it kind of gives me an excuse to talk about really basic apostrophe stuff like widgets and so on, how they go into templates. All right.
So when it comes to templating, I guess you have to use the nunchucks? Or?
Yes. We don't have other template languages baked in at the moment. There is, however, the way our connection to nunchucks, it's not dirty, if you will. You could potentially connect another template language if you were excited to do it. That'd make an interesting add-on module for apostrophe. You can use, by the way, the .njk extension that was introduced later after we first named these, which is nice. So a lot of editors can color code that nicely. Yeah, that's a good question. Is there another templating language that you're fond of?
Not necessarily. It's whatever the flavor of the month is sometimes.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we had to pick a horse. We had a feeling that Nunchucks was a fine choice because Jinja is stuck around, and in fact, it spawned all these imitations for different programming languages. So it felt like it was going to be the most robust choice. Yeah, I should, actually, speaking of templates, I should show you where the templates for the page is coming. I mean, I've jumped right into widgets, but I recognize you guys are pretty new to it. So if we look here in apostrophe pages, views, pages, so we're going to see these are the templates for the different types of pages you can add to the site. The home page, which extends a layout. I'll show you how that has a lot of common things that are shared between them. Brings in the macros, and then I'm going to output this outer area that lets you choose 1, 2, or 3 column widgets. So that's where that outermost layer of structure comes from. In that utils.html, I skipped past that earlier, but here it is. So here's an apostrophe area being output called main. It's like the only one of its kind on the page, but it lets us add widgets of those 3 basic types, 1 column, 2 column, and 3 column. So then under those, we can nest more content and so on. We also use this block level controls flag. This has really only one job, which is just to change the color of the controls so you know what you're doing. When I'm dealing with the dark blue, that's my tip that I'm doing this higher level 1 column, 2 column, 3 column stuff. When I see the green, that means I'm dealing with the inner level. It's especially handy when it gets ambiguous, and it just keeps the controls out of each other's way a little bit. So back here in the home template, I'm extending the layout template. So I should show you guys what that does. The layout template is responsible for everything that's the same between all the page types. And one of the reasons why we like Nunchucks is that in Nunchucks, layouts can extend other layouts, and they also can declare blocks. A block can be overridden by the template downstream from it. So if we wanted the home template to output its title differently, we can do that. We just override the title block. Similarly, we can jam things into the head of the page if we need to. We can put things up at the top like a header element. We can build some navigation. That's something else that's demonstrated here that I forgot to even put on the list. So we have an apostrophe, we have a tree of pages, which I haven't really shown you yet, so let me do that. I'm going to go to reorganize, because that lets us see the whole tree. So for this site, we built a homepage, and then we added subpages, product, subpage, page 2. As you can see, I was kind of bashing around, making pages. And what we can do with that is we can use that to build navigation automatically. So as the end user, I usually say your customer because very often folks are acting as a designer, developer for a third party. You can add navigation to the site where they don't have to manually pick everything. You can build navigation where everybody has to manually pick things, and there's a place and a time for that. But doing it automatically makes it harder to misunderstand how to use the system. So here in the layout, we have this list of tabs. And by tabs, I mean like the top level children of the homepage. So how does that list of tabs come together? It comes together right here. We're going to iterate over this data object. This is all the information that Apostrophe gave the page template. If it's in here, you can access it. We also give the page template an apos object. That's where all of our functions are. If you want to insert an area, you call apos.area, and so on. But so this data has all the data that's specific to what's happening right now. Data.home, it's always populated for you. That's the home page. So why do we always give you the home page? Because you almost always are going to be interested in things like its children or the tabs of the page. So you can iterate over those really easily with a for statement. And you can output links to those pages. Every page has an underscore URL property. And this is the best URL for that page, the thing you should be giving them a link to. So you can easily link them all out and build out your tabs. Similarly, we have a breadcrumb trail. And by that I mean, if I drill down a little bit, I mean this fellow over here we've all seen before, where you're showing your navigation path to where you are right now on the site. So to do that, I'm going to iterate over the ancestors of the current page. Data.page is always the current page. So I can just iterate over its ancestors and output breadcrumbs for each of those. And I think I actually goofed here a little bit. I should have said this. As I have it right now, if I was another level deep, it would have output the current page after each ancestor, which wouldn't look so hot. So I'll just tweak that for next time. So moving on. In the main part of the page, I haven't done anything yet here, and that's because this is a layout, and I'm going to extend that. Sure enough, in home, I've extended main, and that's where I put the columns. They can be edited. But if I'd wanted to, I could have added maybe like a special hero element at the top of the home page or what have you, or put different constraints on what can go there. For now, the default page and the home page are pretty much the same, but it's easy to switch that out. So I think that's a pretty good glimpse of what it's like to work with pages. So I think that sets us up to maybe talk a little bit more about some of the where to put my JavaScript stuff. But I thought I'd ask again if anyone has any questions about page templates and how all that comes together in Apostrophe.
Just not about that, but just to clarify, so this is all in the repo.
Yeah.
Like ready to
100%. Yeah.
people or review.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. If you go to apostrophe-samples on GitHub, you can pull down this whole working project, npm install it. You need, you can look at our documentation page for the system requirements, but you need Mongo on your machine, basically. And you'll be able to upload images, off the bat. That's really the only hard requirement. Of course, you need Node. It is a Node.js based CMS, but apart from that, it's pretty straightforward to get going. So why don't I then jump in a little bit to some of the codier things that I was looking to talk about. I'm going to skip around a little bit, again, because I'm going to try to be clever about starting with the most accessible features. I'm going to talk about parked pages. A parked page in Apostrophe, I've just shown you how people can jump into their site and they can make a new page. I can do page, new page, grandkid. And here it is. That's cool, but you may have certain pages that you always want and you don't want them to change. And Apostrophe gives you a way to do that. If you have some.
That's an example of that. We usually
Yeah.
use that for a home page.
One good use for the home page is a park page, and you get that one for free. But yes, it is, and you can override its attributes and things. Another good example is if you know that your site is all about products, and there will always be a products page, and there should never not be one, because that's where all your product pieces are going to be displayed. Then you're going to want to make that a park page. And I think
Search
that's
is
what
there really, is there
that's true.
option on, yeah.
Yes, we don't have search enabled on this particular site right now, but yes, there's a search page type built into Apostrophe, and you usually wouldn't want the user to inadvertently remove that or manually add it or misunderstand the function of that page. Absolutely. So if I look at apostrophe pages index.js, I can find our parked pages. And for this project, I actually parked two different pages. I parked a products page, and the purpose of a products page is to display products. I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. And also a specialists page. And it's a little made up, but I wanted to talk about what happens when you have a relationship between two different kinds of content. So for this site, we have products and we have specialists. A specialist is a person who's an expert in a product. Is the way I was looking at that. So if I go to my products page, I'm going to see a list of products available. If I go to my specialists page, I'll see a list of specialists available. I don't have any at the moment. We'll see that in a second when I start playing around with tasks. When I park these pages, all I have to do to park one is say, hey, this is the slug I want. So the URL starting, taking for granted the website's URL. The type that it should have, and the title I want to give it. I can set other attributes here if I want. It'll overwrite them. If I want to, I can also say this. If I do it this way, rather than setting the title here, then this is only a default. And after that, they're allowed to edit it, and the edits will stick. Whereas if you want it to be firm, then you leave it this way. So that's how I'll get a couple of park pages in place.
Does it make it so you can't delete these then?
That is a work in progress. We have more to do with park pages. There's some things that you could do, and Apostrophe will wind up putting it back. So we need to disable more functionality for park pages.
I do think also park pages, it also lets you create one, but not let people create more of them. Like sometimes you want a search page, but you don't want more than one search page.
Yes. You don't.
Let someone accidentally create more.
That's exactly right. You don't have to put products page on the list of page types that people are allowed to add. You can just park one, and that is another great win. And it probably makes sense actually. We're not in the habit, but it would really make sense to leave home off the list for the same reason. Home is a park page. You don't ever want them to change that type, and there isn't any reason to make another home page. Of course, at the same time, I showed you this cool 3-column stuff that gives you a great deal of flexibility. So we do have some sites from time to time where really all we do is go nuts with this kind of thing. We only have one page template type. But usually there's a happy medium somewhere with some stuff where you want to really limit what the user can do and other places where you want to let them run wild.
Tom, before we move on to the next thing, I just want to interject with a question from the chat, which was if we thought about offering themes for Apostrophe to kind of give some out-of-the-box front end for new developers.
Certainly, yeah. We have been discussing it quite a bit lately. The challenge has been to understand which audience of developers benefits right away from that. And we want to avoid giving the impression that that you can just FTP it to a PHP server or something. So we want to make sure that we're telling the right story. But I think there's definitely a place for this looks nice in, for instance, a Bootstrap kind of way, and you don't have to re-implement material design from scratch when that's already out there. I think that kind of thing makes a ton of sense.
I sort of add to that we talk about there's a demo site now, a demo.apostrophe-CMS. Where we've redesigned this and are rebuilding it with a new set of components and new design, and that will be all open sources and will be sort of released as a formal theme offering. So you'll be able to get the demo site and use it as the foundation for the project potentially as a little more out of the box.
Yep.
To it, so.
We'll give you prettier starting points than apostrophe samples. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So
Thanks for that, Bill.
yeah, no problem. And themes mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but we're not to go too far on it. But we had a long discussion about some of the deeper meanings of themes and things that people will do with that, say in Drupal and other systems. And we have some exciting ideas around that. But there are already modules like apostrophe workflow that are themes in that like more hardcore technical sense, and that they transform the whole system in new directions. So we're pretty excited about the extensibility of it. So I think I'd like to show you guys how joins work a little bit in Apostrophe, because I just showed you the products page and the specialists page. We don't have any products, we don't have any specialists. Why don't we make some and see what happens when we do that? So I'm going to hop in here and I am going to make a specialist. So I'm going to add a specialist and their name will be Jane Doe. All right. And now I'm going to add a second specialist. We'll see why that's cool in a minute. Joe Guy. Great. Now I'm going to go ahead and add some products as well. Add a cool product. In this info tab, you'll notice it has a price field, which I have to fill in. If I try to save without filling that in, it'll stop me. But it also has a specialists field. So this is my chance to create a relationship between this product and the appropriate specialists. So I can go ahead and I can hand pick a specialist. So now that I've done that, if I go to the products page, I will see the cool product, the one and only product that I've added so far. And when I go to the detail page just for that product, which can be as detailed as you like, although this is very bare bones here, I can see who the relevant specialist is. So these relationships are really easy to access in templates and propagate around the site. When I come over to Jane Doe under the specialist page, I can see what products she specializes in. So these relationships work in both directions. So let me show you how I set that up and how I set up products and specialists to begin with. I showed you the page. I showed you how the pages are added. I didn't show you where products and specialists themselves live. You'll notice that they are edited up here under these, admin models. They're not. Jane Doe is not a page, and that's because you might reference a specialist anywhere on the site. They don't live at a particular page, although you can have a URL for them like this, as long as there's a specialist page somewhere to make them available. So let me show you how I added products to the site. I have a products module configured on the site, and for that module, I'm extending apostrophe pieces. And this is, some systems might call it a content type. This is how you make a document that's not a page in the sense that it has one fixed URL forever. But in every other sense, it's a full-fledged document, something like a product. I'm going to go ahead and give it this singular name. This is what it calls itself in the database. The string's always singular. I'm going to give it a label for the front end. I'm going to give it an alias. That's for convenience in the code. You'll see in a minute how that comes in really handy. And now I'm going to add some fields to it. Every piece has certain common fields, like a title, always has its name, always has published or unpublished, unless you go out of your way not to have those things. But these fields are custom to this particular kind of piece. So it's not just in widgets that we can have schemas and we can add fields. So I'm going to add a price field as a floating point number. I can specify some help. I can make that field required. You saw how the UI enforces that for us. And then I think the more interesting bit, I can create a relationship, or what we would call it a join. Familiar MySQL terminology. Mongo, again, when we started, had no way to implement joins. Now there is one. This is a slightly different approach that we're taking here. But so what we're doing is we're going to say, hey, I'm going to have this relationship. I'm going to call it underscore specialists. That underscore is there because you don't want the specialists to get recorded inside the product in the database. That would be replicating all that information. It would be out-of-date information. You don't want it cluttering up the database twice. It already lives somewhere. So when we use this leading underscore, that says to apostrophe, don't keep this. This is something dynamic. This is something that'll get loaded when I need it. It's not something that you should store back. We're using the join by array type that lets us pick more than one. And we're going to say, hey, we want to join with the type specialist. I could actually have left out with type here. It's fairly clever about inferring this stuff, but we thought it would just be clear as an example to include it. So we're joining from the products type to the specialists type. And that's all we have to do to get that interface where you saw I was able to browse and pick a specialist to go with the product, or search for one or what have you. And then on the front end of it, when I'm in, let's say, products pages, here we have two templates, index and show. Index is where we're going to list a whole bunch of products. And here we want it to be, we don't want it, to take up too much space. So we're just listing information about the product itself, its title, its URL to its detail page, its show page, we call them, and its price, but not its specialist. So let's get down there to the show page for an individual product. And here you can see that we're going to just, again, we're going to loop over all the specialists. And it's sure enough, this is the name we gave the field. We can just iterate over data.piece.specialists and get access to each and every one of them. We can link out to the specialists and get their titles. And this rabbit hole goes as deep as you want it to. We can join these things as much as we need to. So that takes us a pretty long way. Still not really having written any JavaScript. We've been able to do quite a bit just doing what you might almost JSON, like just doing configuration stuff. But so this is where we're going to start to step into doing some neat tricks that do require writing a little bit more code. Do joins make sense to everybody? Did that interface make sense? Cool.
Is there a way to do it in a batch way, like import from a spreadsheet?
Yeah, there's an apostrophe pieces importer module that lets you import pieces from CSV or Excel, or you can even write your own backends for other formats. And it does support, there is a way to do joins through that. Yeah.
So, question. So if you go back to the index page, I thought you had, so the price, I think you had it as a required. Right?
The products index page here?
Yeah.
Right.
So, is there a way to set that as the default, to make it optional, or the user can make a default that you have a price there?
Oh, you mean to make the price of the, to make it not required that there be a price for the product, or?
Yeah, like a default that is, and if the user wants to change it, say.
Oh, default price.
Yeah, or maybe
yes.
Not price, maybe something else, some other.
Yeah, for any field, sure.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So here, I would add, $3 as a default, and I'd be off to the races. Yep. Yep, comes in handy.
Do you have a def versus default?
It is def. When we started with apostrophe schemas, people considered it uncool to use keywords as property names and objects. Since then, everyone has figured out that doesn't matter. There's no version of JavaScript that cares, and so if I could change that, I would. It seems like an unnecessary VC break, We could support both. We could think about supporting both. Cool. Yeah, so let me pull up a little bit more codey things then. So now that we understand what joins are and how they work in apostrophe, that could be a good time to talk about randomly populating them. Now, is this a contrived example? It's not that bad. If someone adds a new product, somebody has to be a specialist. Showing no specialists would be bad, so we say, hell, randomly pick someone. All right, that's a little bit of a forced choice, but you can see how this kind of use case could come up with a project. So let's look at how we're going to pull that stuff off. So I'm going to jump into the code for products in this project. And if I just wanted to make products and be done with it, I could stop here. This is all that I actually need to have products. But if I want to add a little functionality, then I'm going to do a little bit more. And that means that I need a construct function. Construct is a function inside which you can attach methods to your module. So that's all object-oriented terminology. You've got Java and PHP blinking on and off in your brain when I say these things. And it is very similar. The thing to keep in mind is that the construct function takes self as an argument. The reason why we do that is that then you can just attach your methods right to self, or you can call methods directly on self. The reason why we do that instead of working with this, I could go on for 45 minutes.
You've done that.
I have. So in a nutshell, it's because the value of this is different in all kinds of situations, especially when you're doing event handling. And I see some nodding going on. And we're doing a ton of callbacks in asynchronous programming and functional programming. So this is terrible, self is great, because we're inside a closure here. That means self is always the module. It's never anything else. Angels sing and everything's great. So let's skip over add task here, because I'll come to that in a bit. And let's look at how we're going to handle inserting picking a random specialist for a new product. When we wrote the products module, we extended apostrophe pieces. And apostrophe pieces gives us a lot of power already, obviously. Like you go to that admin bar, you pick products, and right away, like you're able to list the products, you can add products, you can do all this UI stuff. That's all coming from the pieces module for free. So we can override some methods that are built into it and are left intentionally empty for us. One of those lifecycle callbacks, people call them, is before insert. And this is a method that gets invoked right before a brand new product is inserted in the database. So this is our chance to mess with it before it's inserted. So I'm going to assign one at random. And to do that, I need to know, first of all, does it already have one? Did the user pick one? Because we don't want to mess that up. And the way I'm going to handle that is I'm going to say, hey, if they already have a list of specialist IDs and that list isn't empty, leave it alone. Now, quick stop, where the heck did specialist IDs come from? This is something that's a convention in apostrophe. If our join is called this, then apostrophe will automatically store the IDs of the specialists in a field called specialist IDs inside the product. Because they have to live somewhere. We have to have a way to get from A to B. We're not storing the specialists themselves. They are their own documents, but we need IDs to access them. So once I know that those IDs are there, it gets a lot easier. Also, what's this return callback null business? If you've done any Node development, it's familiar. If you haven't, it's a little bit strange. This is an asynchronous method. It takes a callback. We have to invoke that callback when we're done. It's not just waiting for us to return. It's waiting for us to call that function. If we never call it, it will never continue, and your product will never get inserted. So it's important to grasp that piece. So I'm going to go ahead now and randomly pick a specialist. And I'm going to do this using promises, because I just mentioned that we have to use callbacks here, but only a little bit, just for this convention. And we, like everyone else, agree that promises are better. We should be using them when we can. You can even use async await with apostrophe. You can use like the newer Node 8 stuff, as long as you're using any API of apostrophe that'll give you a promise. But just to move on to how we're going to do it here, we're using the Bluebird promise library, which I don't know, like how familiar are folks with promises? Have you used them before? Okay. The promises are a wonderful alternative to old-fashioned asynchronous programming where you're invoking callbacks all the time. And the async and await keywords that I was just mentioning are a very recent JavaScript feature that actually kind of bakes those in. The next version of the samples project might just use async await. So it's definitely worth reading up on. But here we're using promises natively. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask the apostrophe specialists module for a count of all the specialists that exist first. So then we can randomly pick one and go get that one. Is this silly when I only have 2 specialists? Sure. But if I have 1,000 specialists, the point of this is to avoid getting them all. That's like, if you get everything, you lose. It's my mantra if I'm dealing with like large databases. The minute I get everything, I may as well go home. You know, bad programmer, no doing it. So what I'm going to do, how am I getting access to this specialists module? Like, how do I know to type self apos specialists? Well, when I wrote the specialists module, I gave it an alias. Because I'm the one writing this project, I get to give modules aliases. So I can say, hey, I want this to be attached right to the apos object for my convenience. So the apos object is available inside every module, self.apos. I can reach into the specialists module, and I can call apostrophe's find method. And I need to, it's a little bit like working with the find method of MongoDB. It's not quite the same. The reason is that we need to do certain things. We want to do certain cool things. One of the things we need to do is we need to decide, hey, are people actually allowed to see these specialists or not? Just by looking at the request, we can tell, are you logged in? Are you an administrator? Are you allowed to manage specialists? Are you just a random stranger? You should only see published stuff. That's all automatic. You don't have to think about any of that security stuff in order to successfully find the right things. And that happens just because we give it rec. We give it the express request object. Who here's used express or used Node a little bit? Okay. So when you do when you build websites with Node, the most common tool for doing that is an NPM module, a Node module called Express. It's like the most lightweight framework for building web apps that you can imagine. It's just set up. You can just set up, hey, when this URL comes in, call this function. And your function gets a rec object, gets a request and a response. And you can then play with what comes in the request and send a response. In Apostrophe, we just pass the request around because we know we can access the response we ever needed to. In Apostrophe, we usually do the responding for you anyway. But so we're going to we're going to start a find. That's going to give us a cursor, much like in Mongo or in Doctrine in the PHP world. I believe there are equivalents in Java too. We want a cursor object or a query builder object, some people will call it. Where you're building up and chaining on these methods in order to be more specific about what you want. And then at the very end, you say, okay, give me either all the stuff or give me a count of all the things that I could get. So in this case, we just want a count. Now, since we're using promises, we don't have to pass a callback function here. What we do instead is we use the promise syntax. We say, hey, okay, now we're going to use then to chain a whole new function, and that will receive the count of promise, of the count of specialists. Now that I've counted the specialists, I'm going to pick one. This is just a little basic JavaScript to say, hey, let's randomly pick an integer, between 0. Let's pick the index of one of those specialists, 0 through the number of specialists minus 1. So if we had an array of them all, we could just bracket that one and grab it. Of course, we don't have an array of them all. So what we're going to do instead is we are going to ask Apostrophe to go and get just one specialist. And we're going to ask it we're going to do find, and then we're going to chain the skip method. This is the same as in MongoDB. I don't know if anyone here has played with MongoDB much in the past. All right. Yeah, so in MongoDB, you can call skip. That's similar to using offset in MySQL or probably Postgres. And so I'm going to skip to the one I want, and then I'm going to limit my results to just one. And then I'm going to get that one object back. And so now in my next then function, I get the winner, I get the specialist. And all I have to do is say, hey, if there's a winner, because there might be no specialists yet in the system. If there's a winner, then I'm going to set my specialist's IDs array to just that winner's ID. So now I have randomly picked a specialist. Even though I didn't enter one, I'm going to see one for my product. And when I'm finished, because I'm playing with promises, but this is a callback-based function, I'm going to need to invoke that callback still. Fortunately, that's really easy to do. If you are working with promises, in your last then function, you just say return callback null. In old school callbacks, that means everything was fine. And if things are not so good, you can just pass your callback straight to the catch method. Catch is invoked just like if you've used exception handling in other languages. It is equivalent to when you do try, catch blocks. And so I just pass the callback function right to it, and it will receive the error, which is exactly what it's expecting. In old school callbacks, if there's any value in the first argument, it's assumed to be an error. So that's how we're able to do all this with promises in relatively modern style, even though the function expects a callback. So I'm going to go ahead just for fun and try that, and hopefully my code doesn't have code rot, but if it does, we can laugh. I'm going to go ahead and insert a product here, and I'm going to make a cool blue thing product, and I'm not going to set specialists. Oh, I need a price, and it caught me on that. Very good. Okay, so now I have cool blue thing, and under info, hey, look, I've got a specialist chosen at random. So that's how we're able to add that logic in the right place in the project. Any questions about that piece before I play with some other pieces? They're all like kind of on this level. That was probably the most bewildering because it was the first real blast of JavaScript in this talk.
You mentioned you used before insert there.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of many sort of points that you have. Where does before insert happen? Like when does before insert happen?
It happens when you have just, yeah, that's a good question. When someone has just called specialists.insert, of course, you can see us call that. That's because it's called for you when you go here into, well, indeed, here in edit product, if this was a brand new product I was adding for the first time, and I hit save product, that's the time that before insert would get called, just before it hits the database. If I'm editing an existing product, it's going to call before update instead. If I don't care, I should override before save, because that gets called either way. There's also after insert and after update and after save. Those are convenient if you actually need the thing to already be in the database. That's not as common, but you might want to do it if you're going to reach out and give the ID of that thing to some third-party service, let's say, or stick it in some other database. Any situation where it's helpful that it already exists. So that's a really good question. Anything else? Anyone
You
else?
said the security baked in based on user type at the data level.
Yeah, it's based on the request object has everything we know about the request. Out of the box in Express, you'll have like rec.query, which is properties of the query string. With a little bit of middleware in Express, you get rec.body, which is the things that were in the post form submission. With the Passport middleware, which we're using, you wind up with rec.user, which is information about a logged in user. And Apostrophe extends that with rec.user._permissions. And this makes it easy to test and say, can this person do X? And we have methods. There's apos.permissions.can. You can call that and pass it rec and the name of any permission in Apostrophe. It'll give you a yes, no answer as to whether the user can do that.
So you can limit based on the product type. This user type is limited based. Can only see this product type.
Right. The most common case for that would be saying this group of users can only edit this kind of product, let's say. But you can also do view restrictions. On pages, it's really easy to see that in Apostrophe. So let me just pull that out and go to page settings really quick. And I can go to permissions here, and I can decide, hey, this page, who can view it? I can do public, login required, or I can get really fancy and say certain people can view it. So I can pick users, or I can pick convenient groups of users. And I can do the same thing for editing permissions. So you can get really, really granular if you want to. Cool. Any other questions before I move on a little bit? All right. So I did want to mention that we were on the specialists page. We were able to see, when we go to the page for an individual specialist, I can see what products they specialize in. So how does that work? Is there some other join on the other side that I also had to populate, or you never saw me, type in a relationship in the other direction, or you never saw any code to put it there either? So here's how that works. If I go to specialists, index.js, you'll see this little field where I am adding an underscore products field. And this is also a join. It's a different type. It's join by array reverse. And what that does is that says, this is saying there's already a join by array on the other side, like pointing at me. I want you to point back. I want you to go get those IDs and let me point right back at it. So I say what type I'm joining back to. Again, it can figure that out, but it's helpful to be explicit. And I say, most importantly, I say which join I'm reversing, just for clarity. Whoop. So I'm going to say, hey, I'm reversing that underscore specialists join you see in that other type. And when I do that, that gives me access in specialists, pages, views, show.html. I can now iterate over underscore products, just like I can iterate over underscore specialists in the other direction. So that part is completely magic and pretty darn handy. Only thing I can't do is I can't edit it from that side. I can only edit it from the side that's pointing towards me. This has never really come up as a big deal. If it does come up as a big deal, maybe for an enterprise client or maybe for one of our internal clients, then we'll probably add a way to edit the relationship from that side. But so far, it's been really convenient even without that feature. Cool. Any other questions about joins before I move on? All right. So I've played about with populating joins. There was a question about themes earlier, and this isn't quite themes on quite that level, but it is a more basic question about themes that comes up, which is people are basically saying, where do I put my browser-side JavaScript? Where do I put my CSS? Where can I put my stuff? And not just where can I put it, but where should I put it? So I wanted to show a practice for that is a reasonably solid approach. So if I go back to app.js, you're going to see I have this little module I called theme. And inside theme, let me close some editors here. I have way too many going. All right. So I'm going to go back to libmodules theme. And this has an index.js file, just like all of our modules do. And here inside construct, I'm making 2 calls to push asset. This is a method that says, hey, apostrophe, I would like you to send site.js from the public.js site.js folder of this module every time a user views the page. This line says, hey, I want you to send site.less every time they view the page. You don't have to use less. It's not mandatory. You can, what a lot of people will do, and we have a lot of examples of this, but not in this particular project, is they will use, let's say, Sass, and they will use, more than likely, they would use Gulp or Webpack. And what they will do is they'll just configure Webpack or Gulp so that it deposits its output files where this is expecting to find them. So they would have the output files of Gulp or Webpack be exactly these files. They might call it a less file, even though there's no less directives in it. It's fine. It's still valid CSS. And that will still work. But in this case, I chose to write a less file because I don't have to have any extra tools. Apostrophe has less built in. And so I wrote some basic styles for my site. These aren't great styles. These aren't exemplary styles in any way. But it does show how you can push these things in successfully, make them work with apostrophe. My site.js file, I'm doing very little here other than proof of concept, but this is, again, I put this inside a jQuery DOM ready function. Does this mean jQuery is always in the browser in the current version of apostrophe? Yes. In the future, will we be arranging it so you don't have to have jQuery if you don't want it to be present? Yes, we'll be doing that too. But for now, in the browser, you can count on jQuery, so you may as well. You can count on Lodash being present. Meaning you can count on this guy being available and doing things like this. You can count on a few other libraries being present as well. But in the future, we're moving toward not requiring you to have as much of that stuff and being able to make more of a choice about where that goes. So this is a good approach if you want to make like a theme. You could make a theme like this, by the way. Stick it in an NPM module and add it to your app.js. If app.js sees a module configured, doesn't see it in libmodules, or even if it does, it will check to see if it's in NPM also. It'll start by loading them from NPM. If it finds them in NPM, then as something you install with npm install, which is
it doesn't look on that package registry. Like it looks for your node.
Yeah, it'll look for your node modules first. Yeah. And so that means that if you come up with a cool theme that you made in this way, and you want to distribute it so that other people can use it in their apostrophe sites, be our guest. You can put it out there as an npm module, and people can npm install it right into their projects. So. Other things that would be neat to look at, I also added a pretty handy way to generate a lot of products and specialists in a hurry. Strictly speaking, we had a way to generate them, but I did some neat things to extend it. So let's take a look at what we can do with that. If I run this, and I'll do this in another terminal so I don't have to shut the app down. I'm going to do products generate. I'm going to generate 100 products. And this is a built-in feature in Apostrophe. That will now, we should go, when we come back, we should find that we have lots and lots of products. We also have pagination out of the box here. Something that I didn't demo in this project yet, but we probably will, is we also have support for infinite scroll. So you don't necessarily have to have pagination. Before you throw out pagination, it's a good idea to ask your designer if there's anything important in the footer, because no one will ever see it. We often say, okay, we're going to do infinite scroll, and then we say, oh, wait, no, not on the site, can't do that. Sometimes a simple load more button is better. But you'll notice that in addition to having a separate name for each product, I have a separate price. I have a range of prices for the products. You also notice it did choose random specialists, so hey, that worked. But so how are we getting these randomized prices for the new products that we're introducing? So let's take a peek at that. In the products module, we have a generate method. And this is a method that's standard in Apostrophe. In any module that extends apostrophe pieces, there's always a generate method. And what that does is it takes just the number. Let's say we're generating 100 pieces. This will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as we count through them. And it will, by default, it'll just give us a product that has title and that number. And then the rest of the fields are pretty boring. So what we're going to do is going to make it a little bit more interesting. But we don't want to start from scratch. We don't want to be responsible for setting the title, saying it's published, all that stuff. So we're going to use something called the super pattern. And this is a really important pattern in Apostrophe. Has anyone here done object-oriented programming in Java or maybe in PHP? Okay, so in those languages, I mean, there's a parent keyword that if you were writing a method of a class, you can say, hey, I want to override this method that I inherited from my base class, but I also want to call the original one first, get hold of the value, and then mess with it. You'd use parent to do that. This is the same idea. But since we're building our objects ourselves by attaching things right to self, it's very simple. We actually grab the existing method. We grab self.generate and we stick it in a variable. It's actually not a variable because it's constant. It's constant. Now we can assign a new function to self.generate, and inside that we can call supergenerate, the original version, to get the product started. Then we can add the one thing that's different, which is we just want to set a price for it. And I'm basing the price on the number so that the prices are all a little bit different. And finally, we'll still return the product. So you'll see this super pattern a lot in any place in Apostrophe where you want to extend what a function is doing but not throw it out. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. So other neat things that we have in here, we have some custom tasks. So this generate task, I already told you that's free, and we were just extending one little piece of it. But let's say that we want to do something cool like list all the products in a command line way. So I want to say products list and get a list of all the products that are out there. And I see something slightly funny happen there. We'll take a look at it. Maybe we'll fix it live. So I'm going to list all the published products and their URLs. That's my goal. So I'm going to write a task. And a task in Apostrophe is just a function that we pass to this add task method. We give it a name, so I can type this at the command line. We give it a little bit of help, so if I do node app help, I'll get a list of all the tasks along, and then if I can do node app help products list, I'll get a little information about what that task does. So now I can finally write my function. Now I wanted to show you guys, you've seen me use the function keyword a lot, you've seen var flying around. This modern JavaScript is welcome here. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and use an arrow function. Really doesn't matter. So I'm going to use a modern ES6 JavaScript style. As long as I write a function that takes apos and argv as arguments, I am good to go. Apos, we've seen this object before. It gives me access to lots of things. Argv, this is information about what the command line arguments were. And I'll show you what we can do with it. And so inside the function, let's play around and see what we can do. Now, my first challenge is that I'm going to use Apostrophe's APIs. And almost all of them take a request object, like you get from Express. We're not in a request. We're at the command line. So what do? We're going to ask the Apostrophe tasks module to give us a request. And here I'm calling get a non-request, because that's going to give us a request that's got the same level of privilege as a random stranger looking at the website. I could also call just this, and that would give me an admin request, a God request. The reason why that's the default for tasks is that so often you're doing stuff like that. You want to just insert things and just power things around. But in this case, I wanted to show off all the published stuff. So I'm going to request all the products, and I'm going to use toArray. We saw toCount and toObject earlier. And then in my then function, I'm going to receive all the products. Again, I'm going to use an arrow function. So in my code for this function now, I'm going to loop over all the products. And again, ES6, I'm just using for each and not using Lodash to iterate over things. And for each product, I'm just going to output its title and its URL. Now, it's interesting that the URL didn't populate here. I don't know why off the top of my head. So I'll probably take a look at that later and update the project. Now, when you work with promises, people will tell you you've got to catch all the errors. In some cases, it's nice to let someone catch you. And apostrophe tasks will do that. If a task returns a promise that rejects with an error, the task runner will catch that, display a graceful error message to the user. Everything's great. So that's one more reason why promises are really nice when you can use them. So I made another task in here. This one discounts the price of all the products across the board. So how would we do a thing like that? And this one, by the way, I did not use promises, just to show that you can do it with a callback interface instead, if you feel like it. So what am I going to do? I'm going to iterate over all the products that exist in the system. And because there's a lot of products, I'm going to make a choice not to use toArray this time. I'm going to use a lower level API and apostrophe, because I'm interested in every product no matter what. I don't care if it's published. I don't care who has privileges for what. I don't care if it's in the trash, because this is like a blanket across the board thing that I'm doing. So for that, I can use the apos migrations module. It has some really handy methods, including each doc, where I can say, here's some MongoDB criteria, limiting it to just the products. And now I'm going to give us a function to deal with one product. And in that function, I can do whatever I want. So what I'm going to do with it is I'm going to say, okay, if there's no price, I'm done. And I have to be careful here. If I were to just say this, that would seem fine until I had a few hundred products, and then it would crash. The reasons why I have to do with the way there's a stack of calls when you're programming, and when you're working with callbacks, JavaScript is not usually smart enough to figure out that it doesn't need to keep digging that stack deeper and deeper just because you haven't returned yet. But it's generally fine to know that this is the safest way to invoke a callback if you haven't done anything asynchronous. You haven't gone out and gotten anything from a database. This is the safest way to do it. Set immediate. Has anyone used set timeout before in JavaScript? To say like, hey, call this after a certain number of milliseconds. Set immediate callback is almost identical to set timeout callback 0. Like as soon as you can call this function, but not now. It's good. Your code will return, the stack will not grow, and then it'll call it for you. It lets the system breathe. The difference is that set immediate is a little faster, and you don't have to type the 0, basically. So now I need the price, and I need to get the price from somewhere. I'm going to choose to get it from the command line. I'm going to use this function. Let's go ahead and try it. Products, what's it? Products discount? Yes, discount. And I'm going to discount it by a percentage. So let's reduce all prices by 10%. Okay. So how did I get that 10 in the code? argv is this handy object that has already been parsed for you. If you've done a lot of programming, you've probably seen argv as a variable before. And you're thinking like, this is this array of all the strings, and I gotta work through it and figure out how to turn this into something and so on. You don't have to do any of that stuff. When you work with argv, if you're interested in the positional arguments, like the name of the task would be the 0th one, and then this discount will be the first one, you can just use this underscore property of argv. Just bam, grab it. If we had done something like this, if I'd wanted to do it this way, which is another common convention, especially if it's optional, something that's not always specified, I can access that even easier. That would just be argv.percentage, and it would just pull that right up. I am responsible, though, for making sure that JavaScript understands I want it to be treated as a number. So I'm going to parse it as a floating point number. If I can't do that, I'm going to return an error to the callback. Which, by the way, if you want the user to see the error message and not a big stack trace like your code crashed or something, because this isn't, the code didn't crash. They entered something silly. There's a difference. Your task simply has to pass a string rather than an error object. And the task runner will say, aha, that's an error message. That's not a hard error. So now I'm going to discount the price of the product. I'll just do a little bit of math on that, pull off that percentage. And now I'm going to go right into MongoDB. So this is yet another thing that people are always asking us how to do. How do I go straight to Mongo if I want to? Like, what if I want to bypass apostrophes, cute, model APIs and be really fast and really direct and maybe update just one property of a document? And the answer to that is you use apos.docs.db. This is the collection that contains all the documents in apostrophe. It's the Mongo collection that contains them all. And you're going to update, and you're going to say, hey, I want to update just this one that has this ID. And I'm going to set the price to my new price. So I've changed just that one field. Using set in this way can be really powerful and helpful because let's say that someone had edited the product while this loop was running. Their edits would get lost if we were to smush the whole product back in. But by setting just this one field, we avoid that risk. So we're modifying as little as we need to. So it's handy. And finally, I just have to pass the final callback of the task itself to finish the job. So now we've iterated over all the products. We've discounted all of them. We've done it very, very quickly. Any questions on this stuff? Pretty crazy stuff. Let's take a peek. Let's see if our price is actually discounted. Yep. These numbers are definitely a lot crazier than they were before. So I'd say these numbers are reduced by 10%. Cool. Yeah, so I think I have just one or two things worth mentioning at this point because a lot of that's already been covered directly or indirectly. Yeah, I think there's really only one thing left worth touching on, which is we do get a question, which is, all right, I like how apostrophe gives me the children of the current page as underscore children, gives me the children of the home page as data.home._children, but I put this cool image widget inside each of those pages, and I can't get at it from another page. Like on the home page, I'm iterating over all these tabs, and I want to put a little image in a drop-down menu or something. I can't get at it. What gives? And the answer is that you don't want apostrophe to get everything all the time because that would be very slow. But you can tell apostrophe, I want you to get a little bit more information than it does by default about all these related pages. So if I, by way of example, I think I probably still have this set up. So I can go to subpage here, and I think I can add, let's see if I still have it, or if this actually got, oh, there we go. I'm going to go ahead and add a thumbnail to it, not the same image I've used 88 times. Let's see. Let's grab some watermelon. There we go. Yep. Came from my garden, no less, last year. It's harvested a little too soon. Very sad. So now, this is obviously not the prettiest design of what you might do with these per-page thumbnails. Just slobbing them right up here. But in a rollover drop-down menu situation, a feature like this can be really handy to have an image for each page. So how did I make that work where it wouldn't work out of the box? And the answer is if we go in the Pages module, we can take a look at the filters configuration. Apostrophe has this idea of cursors that I already talked about a little bit. It also has this idea of filters. A filter is a little bit of a misnomer. A filter is a method that can get called on a cursor, like skip or limit, or like some filters that apostrophe adds that are custom for particular kinds of cursors. The cursor for getting pages supports a filter called ancestors. And by default, it'll call that filter for you in order to get all the ancestors of the current page. And it'll get the children of each ancestor too, because that lets you build like accordion navigation, some people would call it, where you've got like at each level, you've got, okay, here are all my direct ancestors, here's their subpages, so I get a real sense of how I might jump around in the website. So what we're going to say is, in addition to fetching the basic information like the title and building the URL and so on, I want you to get this one area. I want you to get the thumbnail area. Don't go get everything. Don't go get like the mountain of joined in widgets that people did that pull content from all over the place because that would be slow. But the thumbnail is worth it to me. So spend that little bit of time. So that's the secret to getting those images onto the page. And I think that just about covers all the functionality that we've managed to shoehorn into apostrophe-samples so far. We think it's helping because I think that we're getting like a lower incidence of some of the like really basic, hey, where does this go questions. We got a lot of links in the documentation that point to this project now to try to help with those kinds of things. As new developers, at least to Apostrophe, I'd really love to hear your input on like what kinds of topics you think people miss when they do tutorials. What might seem obvious to us is totally not obvious. Working with a new CMS, I'm definitely interested in hearing that. And of course, we're definitely interested in hearing those kinds of suggestions from folks on the chat as well. Cool. Any questions or thoughts? Pretty much at the end of my spiel. Cool. All right.
I don't have any additional questions from
Okay. All right. I'm going to be brave and click stop streaming now.